Thanks so much to everybody for clicking on the podcast and taking a listen this week's. It's a special episode because today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day in America. And so we took this moment to watch the movie Selma. And so we shared this with the boys. And as you'll hear in our conversation, we do talk through different specific story beats. So if you haven't seen the movie and don't want to be spoiled, maybe check out the movie first before you listen. But we also encourage you to come back and listen as we asked the boys pointed questions around how the movie made them feel, how the different things, what they thought about it, and it's good to hear. So without further ado, we will get to the podcast. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining the podcast. This one's going to be a little bit different than our past podcasts just because the subject matter was a little daunting, a little sobering, and we're kind of focusing on just on one movie, and that is the movie Selma, based on the fact that today, the day that we're putting this up online, is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we wanted to take some time to focus on that. But first, let's go ahead and share who's going to be on the podcast today. I'm Sprang, and I am the dad, and I also have.
I'm Kristen. I'm mom.
And then
I'm Jacob. I'm 13. I'm a kid.
I'm Connor. I'm 13.
I'm Colton and I'm 11 and I'm a kid. I'm Zeke and I'm 10 and I'm a kid.
Yes.
A boy kid.
That's right. One of the things that we have been pretty clear about, well, we've tried to be pretty clear about it as we've become a family, is we do like to talk about things that are maybe don't necessarily relate to us because we are a white family in America, and I'm a white male in America, and all of our boys are white males in America. And so a lot of the issues that some of our friends face are just things that won't affect us. They don't hold us back like they do some of our other friends. And so addressing those things, talking about those things has been something we've done as a family. Even back in 2020, in the midst of COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement, we took some time to get out there and march with some of our friends and march with people that were trying to voice their pain and voice their hurt over the things that were happening. But I do remember, and this was actually brought up recently this week, Connor, you mentioned something that happened that year. Do you remember what happened?
We were playing and we saw that they were going to do a thing on Fortnite where they would show his speech.
For the kids, they did a kind of conversation. They showed some of the Martin Luther King stuff. They did a conversation. And then after that was done, after we watched that, we went and marched and we had signs. Do you remember that, Colton?
Yes, I do. It was fun.
Jacob, do you have any thoughts about that march when we did that?
Yeah, it was just kind of cool to get out there and help other people voice their opinions. Because whenever, like, I would think, never mind.
Okay, you can restart.
I would think that if you're being oppressed and by a certain group, and then people from that group come and help you voice your opinions, I feel like that would be a huge boost in confidence and power.
I mean, that's something that actually happened in the movie too, that we'll get to in just a moment. But anybody else have anything to share about when we did the marches?
I thought it was boring, but looking back, I now think that was very important because Black lives do matter. They used to not have rights like white people.
For me, I grew up kind of in Jacksonville, Florida, and I got the opportunity to be a part of a school that was a magnet school, and they would bus, and it was basically they had higher classes. They had an international baccalaureate program, at college prep classes. Everything was honors. They had college classes there, but it was they bussed a lot of kids in to more of a downtown area, And then there were also kids from that local area at the school as well. So when I went to middle school and high school, I was in a more diverse school. It was, I don't know the numbers, but there was a high Black population and a high Filipino population, and then a lot of the white kids that were being brought in as well. And so I didn't go to a school that was just a bunch of white folks, and appreciate that opportunity. I appreciate that culture, and I think even here in Wiley, there's a wide culture. There's at least opportunity to experience culture beyond just being in classes with a bunch of white kids.
There's an equal amount in every single race.
Yeah.
And we do have a large Indian population in our area too, which is really cool.
I feel like there's a little bit more white people than black people.
Yeah, there's probably a higher percentage of white people. What's your best friend's nationality? Do you know?
He's from Turkey and he speaks Turkish. He's smart, and he's funny.
And so, what is it like? I know that you've learned a lot from him about his religion too. So, what are some of the things that you've learned from him?
Like any holidays
Yeah, like
that are different?
Ramadan. It's where you fast until the sun sets. You can't eat or drink.
Yeah. And so, you've had some experience or some interactions with him and his family, and a lot of the folks play basketball out back too, right? With everybody.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I did want to kind of touch on that, the different things of like where we are and how we interact with what kind of our interaction is with people of color, because like Kristen said, she grew up in mainly a white school.
Yes, it was predominantly white, and it was just when I went to Texas Women's in Denton. I think what shocked me the most was that I was then the minority, and not that it bothered me. It was just surprising. But I do want to highlight when I met Jonathan. One of our first conversations, he really opened my eyes to um, my privilege that I did not see. I mean, I knew the town I grew up in was wealthy, but it wasn't like my personal privilege, you know. So my eyes have been opened since 2017, and I'm really grateful to be now share it with the kids and really just have a different filter as you view the world.
Like I said, my high school and middle school was pretty diverse. My college was not. It was predominantly white, and the first places I worked predominantly white. And then thankfully, like with the going into like 2014 through 2016 or so, I got exposed to well, I think the Black Lives movement started happening. I got to experience some talks with people that were different than I'd ever heard on the subject, and I began having those conversations, and I began to find myself struggling or being kind of the feeling guilty or whatever. That's part of the whole thing is like the white shame, but it's not about having shame. And I think that's our first reaction at times is when someone says, you know, Black Lives Matter, or they talk about civil rights. It's people feel like that they're taking away something from us as the white folks, and it's not at all the case. And so being exposed to those conversations and knowing, trying to, you know, like we talk about movies helping us understand where we've come from, helping us understand people from their perspective. Well, Kristen and I both discussed it, that we wanted to watch this movie today with the boys as a way of kind of interacting with the subject of race in America. What do you guys think about racism in America? How bad do you think it is, or what have you heard about it before watching this movie?
I think that it still is a pretty big problem, especially in the southern countries, not southern countries, states. But I do believe that it is getting better, and every little kind of march or whatever we do, it's just gonna get better.
Sometimes we can look at the situation now, especially with what has happened, and definitely recognize I'm a white male in America, so my perspective is definitely different. but I'm trying to say these things, and I might not always say them correctly or say them 100% accurate, but I'm trying to voice for the voiceless. So I do think it's better than it was back in 1965, which is when this movie was set, obviously. But there's still a ways to go. There's still path that needs to take place. And I think part of that is because the things that we feel about people that aren't like us, it's something that's ancient. When and it was kind of like a defense mechanism back in the early days of humans, is they don't look like us, we should be fearful. And it was a defense mechanism, it was a way of kind of protecting ourselves. But as we get to know people that are different from us, we recognize there's more commonality than there is difference, and we begin to embrace. And I think that's what the part that we're still trying to crack the nut on. Even though people are different than us, they look different than us, they have different backgrounds than us, they have different religions than us, we are way more alike than we are different. And so I'm choosing to live my life with open arms instead of being fearful of people different than me. I'm trying to instill that in you guys as well, because that's a better way to live. I believe, as someone who follows Jesus, I believe that he would be on the side of loving people that are different than us. We see it throughout the story of his life. So, with that said, let's kind of jump into the movie. The movie starts, and Martin Luther King Jr. is getting his Nobel Peace Prize. What did you guys think about that? Did you guys know that he got the Nobel Peace Prize?
No, I didn't know that he got that, and I think it's cool because like he led the black people, and I don't think many black people have gotten awards because of their color.
Good call.
Yeah, and I think the Nobel Peace Prize being a worldwide award, I think that's an incredible thing. Do you remember what happened after that?
I don't if it was a church. I'm not sure, but it got blown up, and then the 4 girls died.
How'd that make you feel?
They weren't even doing anything wrong. They were just walking on the stairs.
Does that seem right?
When it like first happened, I'm like, like that, and it really like scared me, and I'm like, what did they do wrong, bro? Like, it makes no sense to just hurt innocent girls. It makes no sense.
Yeah. And what we found out was that was a bombing in Selma, Alabama, and that kind of sparked a movement.
Whenever it happened, I was scared and I jumped, and then my jaw was just dropped the whole time, just watching.
Yeah, it kind of panned out, and you saw the aftermath of the bombing, and that triggered a movement to where they felt like that this is the place that we can take a stand. The next scene was Oprah Winfrey playing a lady that was walking in to fill out her voter registration card. What were some of the things that stood out about that whole conversation?
I was just wondering why this guy was asking like a million questions.
First question was, can you recite the entire preamble of the Constitution?
Did that, and then she was like, "How many lawyers or something?"
Yeah, how many judges are serving in the county? Yeah.
And then she said how many, and then he said name them. So then she just walked away.
Shocked me. I can't recite the preamble. The amount of non-pertinent information and boundaries that the Black community had to fight just to live out their basic right as an American just blew my mind.
We talked about, kind of paused the movie and talked about how a white person walking into that would not have been asked these questions. They would have just been able to fill out the registration form, get their voter registration, and be able to vote. But because she was Black, there were all these extra barriers and these extra questions that were being asked to try and stump them to say, well, no, you can't get it. So that's the difference between privilege and not privilege, is when there's extra barriers that are holding back. We all have barriers. We all have things we struggle through to try to accomplish our goals. But that's kind of that was a good example of where.
It was a control.
Yeah.
It was a white person controlling the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw the voting, so that kind of introduced to us to the main point of the movie, which was Black folks did not have the right to vote. They had the right to vote, but there were, in the South especially, there was a lot of local county control and barriers that these artificial barriers that they were putting up to keep Black people from actually being able to vote. And the law said that they had the right to vote. They were putting a lot of barriers in front of them being able to vote. Martin Luther King and his group they said, we're going to go to Selma, we're going to make a stand here. And then while he's there, he gets assaulted. Yeah. And then there's another group there that had already kind of been doing some work, and they were kind of butting heads. So they had this argument about it, and the local group was worried that Martin Luther King's just going to bounce in and then he's going to leave, and then we're left picking up the pieces, And so there's this kind of tension there. But one of the things he said was like, we need drama so that people will see it on TV and stuff. And so that was kind of they got everybody on board. What did you guys think about his interactions with the president?
I feel like the president wasn't caring. He was pretending, trying to help. I don't know.
How did that make you feel?
Angry? Yeah.
Why?
Because he's not helping anyone, and you're supposed to help the country, not make it worse.
Yeah.
I feel like the interactions with the president kept on getting worse. Like at the start, he was trying to cover the fact that he didn't care, and then while it gets towards the end, it's kind of obvious that he doesn't care about it.
It wasn't a priority to him as the president because he's not had any struggles.
Yeah. What was a turning point, Jacob, for the president? He's in the room with the governor from Alabama. And do you remember what he said? The president said?
Yeah, he said, I don't want to be remembered as a person who was on the same side of the story as you were.
Yeah. And I think that's a key point. I think you're totally right, Colton, that throughout the whole movie, he's still trying to push what he wants to happen, and he's not listening to Martin Luther King. But it was at that moment that he realized, I'm on the wrong side of this issue. Is that when he sees the racism and the way that filters the politics of the governor of Alabama, he realizes the racism in himself, and he's like, okay, I don't want to be on that side. And I think that sometimes that's one of the things that movies can help us do. Is it can help us recognize things about ourselves that are wrong, and we can change them. So when they do show up to Alabama, after he gets hit, they decide they're going to go march to the courthouse.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the protesters were breaking the law by sitting in front of the courthouse?
I don't think they were, because it said that anybody could be in the streets, and they were just in the street asking if they can come in the courthouse. I don't think that's breaking the law.
Okay. Well, why do you think the sheriff thought it was wrong of them to be doing that? He was really upset.
Because there's so many of them.
Maybe he felt outnumbered.
Yeah, he didn't want all of them to go in the courthouse.
Yeah, they were trying to hold them out from being able to vote, and he wanted them to again go the back door, and he's like, no, we're going to go in the front door.
Another reason is that why they weren't breaking the law is Amendment number 1, the freedom to assemble, and that's pretty fine to assemble peacefully. They're just asking to go to the courthouse. That's assembling peacefully.
Yeah, I think that's a big key moment to recognize in this story. And the president said it in one of the early conversations that he wanted Martin Luther King to lead this movement and not any of those other militant, in his words, those other militants like Malcolm X. So Malcolm X, if you guys didn't know, I think it kind of portrayed it in this very shortly, but he felt like violence was inevitable for the movement to take shape, whereas Martin Luther King Jr. felt like nonviolence was the path.
He said peace was the path.
Right. So, and I think there was a really good conversation at the end that really hit that hammer home. But what do you guys think about the whole peaceful protest and the nonviolent stuff? Like, what did you think that was that important? How did that hit you that they kept saying, no, we're not going to fight?
Like whenever he said we need to use guns, but Martin Luther King said, if you shoot 2 of them, they'll shoot 10 of us.
They're pretty much saying if you shoot at them, they're just gonna get madder,
Yeah. So if you use violence, I think then it's just going to escalate the situation, and they're just going to retaliate even worse. So we have to make sure that we're staying within the laws. What about you guys? How did you guys interact with the nonviolence piece of it?
I thought it was smart because if you're being oppressed and you use violence, it's just gonna give the other person more reason to like attack you because then they'll have an excuse. And so if you do it from a peaceful way, then you can actually turn people's heads and make them look at you without having to forcefully do it.
Did watching this movie actually change the way you view the importance of voting?
Because they can't vote for another person that would stop racism and bad people.
Does
Yeah.
this make sense why we as parents really try to push the voting concept hard? Because I know we show you that we'll go to the polls, and I've dragged, Connor and Colton with me. It's not always fun and it's boring, but our voice matters.
Because it's a really long wait and it's boring. But whenever we went there, the rocks were painted. So it looked pretty cool.
If you don't vote, then you might not get the person you want to be elected get elected.
Yeah. So if you think about it, like, so if we're gonna something really simple, how would you feel if we said, "Hey, we're going to give everybody a chance to vote for what restaurant we're going to go to tonight, but you don't get to vote"?
What?
Yeah. So if you don't have the right to vote, then what happens?
I'm gonna boycott this house.
Right. Well, you're learning something. So if you don't have the right to vote, then you can't have anybody that's fighting for your side and what your needs are. I know going out to eat is not a need necessarily, but as an example, so like when you think about the basic human needs, if they aren't able to vote, then they aren't able to have their needs. Anybody speaking on their side. So that's a key point.
They didn't have any representation in the courthouse, no representation with being on the jury, because if
Hmm.
you can't vote, then you're not eligible to be in a jury to give a peer
Yeah.
support.
Yeah. This definitely opened my eyes when I first saw it as well, just to the importance of voting. And something I want to be clear about is that there's a combination within the Black community. There's a combination of religion and faith and loving God with um, government and rights, and a lot of that has to do because the government has been and America has been the place that's held them back from having those basic human rights, and they turn to God for that hope that there will one day um, be a chance for us to be free and all be equal. And I think for me, I don't necessarily have a clear party politic, Republican or Democrat. I don't necessarily care. What I care about is I allow my faith in the way that Jesus teaches us to live and care for others. That's my politic. That's love is my politic. I'm not going to choose a side just because they're named a certain thing. I'm going to choose whichever um, is the one that, for me, shows love and care for others.
I think it's kind of ironic that America is usually known as like the place that has freedom, but not everybody always had freedom in America because first of all there's slaves and like racism and stuff. So I don't think America always had freedom.
Yeah, and I think for me, I agree with that too. So it's kind of like the founding fathers had these great goals for what they wanted in the country, and they tried to outline those. But then when it gets into practice, a lot of times it doesn't meet up to those high standards, and so that's why we keep trying. That's why people keep trying to change, and that why there's still debates, and why there's voting, and why there's changes, and why there because we're all. I think everybody's trying to get to those high and lofty goals that the founding fathers said, but we haven't been able to live into that yet, and so we're still trying to be a place of freedom. So it's a good call out, Colton. So, what did you think about the fact that the FBI was watching Martin Luther King and listening to all of his conversations and stuff?
I just felt like it was an invasion of privacy because even though he could be seen as a threat from from the U.S. government's perspective, he's still a U.S. citizen, and even if he wasn't, he won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that should be enough to get the FBI off his butt.
And I think the other thing that kind of shocked me was how adamant the FBI director was against Martin Luther King. In an effort to try and stop him from doing the march, they sent a recording to his wife of his affair, and that trying to break up the family so that they would not continue with the march. But instead, the march still went on, and that was when they got attacked, and it was broadcast on national television. What did you guys think about that attack? How did it make you feel?
It makes me feel like mad because why would you attack your own citizens? And
Were they doing anything wrong?
no, that's like if someone's just walking down the street to a different place and you just beat them up. That's not right.
How did it make you feel that it was the state police doing it?
It really boils my blood because the Bill of Rights specifically states a lot of rights that are belong to U.S. citizens, not like the difference between race is not in the fact, but you still have to follow the rights of the U.S. citizens. They also have the freedom to assemble. So I felt like my blood was literally boiling to see that,
Yeah.
and it really hurt my heart.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you guys?
Like, so real. And then I couldn't look anymore.
So
Yeah.
you feel like you wouldn't be scared of police?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a totally different viewpoint from what they were going through.
The only thing I fear is getting pulled over for a speeding ticket. Like, I just don't want to have to pay a fine. But I've never had to fear for my life, and I think that's why, because that happened back then, because it happened. It's continuing to have moments where black men are killed by police, and it seems so unfair. So there's this constant fear that people have of police, and so this was just one of those examples. So they had the first march, and then they decide they're going to do another march against the judge's orders. Judge said don't march. The president said don't march, but he said we have all these people because of the broadcast on TV. That's what brought a whole bunch of people. So what do you think about what did you think about that? Like the fact that people were driving from Boston all the way down to Alabama.
It resembles America because people are coming together to fight what's wrong.
Is that something that you would try and do if you saw injustice, that you would want to stand up for it?
Yeah, probably.
There's still so much work to be done, but we try to participate where we can. Second march, they got to the bridge, the police stepped away, and then Martin Luther King knelt to pray and then turned around and walked away. What did you guys think of that?
I felt like it was a real message to people that like were watching the broadcast live, because it's crazy to think that he would pass up that opportunity. But whenever you hear him explain it later in the movie, it really does make sense in your head. Like there could have been like some retaliation from the people marching, and it, yeah, it was a smart move by him.
The thing for me that stood out about that was the fact that the police who had hurt them days before just decided to walk away without any. They didn't have backup from the president. They didn't have support from the president. They didn't have support from the government. They didn't have support from anything. All that stuff. I think he just felt like this might not go right. We need to step away and actually get the judge's backing to do the march, because that's really what's going to move it. Because otherwise, they're just letting us pass, trying to make it not mean something. They basically had another court session where they presented their case about the violence, and then the judge basically ruled on the side of that organization that they could have the march and the governor couldn't stand in the way of it. And then they did do the march, and it was one of my favorite songs. I really like that song. Yesterday Was Hard for All of Us by Fink. But any other thoughts on the movie?
I like how at like the end it showed real videos of the march and stuff.
When he did the speech, and that just like really stood out to me. It like made me feel warm and fuzzy inside.
I feel like I've always kind of had that idea, like of equality, but movies like this, it just really reinforces it and makes me like want to be more cautious about what I'm really saying.
It really just shocks me every time I see things like that. Like I used to think that violence was a good answer. I really did, because it's like I grew up in Texas. You have guns, and you actually will make more movement and more waves and change by being peaceful and just having conversations. It doesn't have to be met with violence.
Jesus, in one of his talks, talked about if someone slaps you on the cheek, on the right side of your face, then turn the other cheek. And what many people have viewed that before in the past has been just being pacifist, or just sit there and take it. But what he's actually saying is what we just saw in this movie, that the third way, it's not just fight back, or it's not just take the pain and don't do anything. It's this third way, this non-violent. How do we have to try and find a third way to react to oppression and violence, and it's not always easy, but they displayed it here, and I think the whole movement displayed it very clearly of trying to find ways, because they said in the movie, they said it's not easy. Nonviolence is not the easy way. It's very hard. It's very hard to be nonviolent in the face of the violence. But that's the choice that they made, and it was displayed very well in the movie. The last thing I want to say that I think is important to say is many of the ways that we grow up in this neighborhood, and how we're the places we go and the people that we interact with. If we just go through life and don't expose ourselves to other ideas and other thoughts, then we could just end up going through life not really understanding other people's pain and other people's struggle. And so we watch these movies at times to remind ourselves of how we should be treating others, but also just to keep reminding us to be empathetic to people, and to not become part of the problem because we're just not paying attention. We want to be focused. We want to make sure and be purposeful, and listen, and expose ourselves to these ideas so that we can be more understanding of the people that we interact with in our life. Because if we don't do it with purpose, then we'll just end up just being kind of going around with our eyes closed and not really helping anyone. So cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the podcast. We really do appreciate all the support you provide. If you want to know how you can help us out, just share this link to the podcast on your social media channels. Share the Instagram links. That would be helpful. Like and subscribe on YouTube, however you take your podcast in. We really would appreciate the follows and the shares. It would mean a lot. So we hope you enjoyed this deep dive in this conversation around race, and using the movie Selma as a talking point for the kids. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Send us a comment, send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time.